What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are back with Ultimate Black Panther, and this story is incredible. It's one of the best comic book stories that I think I've ever read. So, in the first video that we did, because we covered the first issue before, we basically talked about how there was a force out there trying to subvert the power of T'Challa within Wakanda and to actually destroy Wakanda itself. And this power came in two forms. The first was Ra, and the second was Khonshu. Kind of like Marvel's Ultimate Universe version of what you and I would consider to be Moon Knight, except the two of them are effectively working together as essentially twins. And so because of the fact that there is a spy somewhere in Wakanda, maybe even multiple spies, T'Challa's turned pretty dark here. And while he is in a relationship with Okoye in the Ultimate Black Panther stories, which he's not in the main Marvel universe, what she says is, for 30 days, Wakanda has lived in fear. I hear them. When I am among them, they speak to me. And where T'Challa says, I will root the rot from our kingdom, Okoye, this war will end, her response is, they are not scared of war, they are scared of you. Because the reality here, and she even says this, right? Like, we're searching each other for our enemies. The reality is that much like in the main Marvel universe, the people of Wakanda in Marvel's Ultimate Universe line of comics, they look to T'Challa as their king and their leader, and basically the guy that will always guide them to like a better tomorrow. But what happens when that person starts coming for you, right? Just indiscriminately snatching people up and putting them behind bars, as Okoye says it, right? Conducting interrogations. She says, our people cannot even grieve your father with our trust because the father of T'Challa was killed. That's what really set all this in motion in the first place. And he kind of reaffirms his own position and he says, among our people are servants of our enemies. I am doing what must be done to protect us. And Okoye kind of calls the bluff, right? She's like, you're grieving and you're angry. And you're angry because you're afraid. Fear is what anger truly is. And where he asks, like, what is it that I'm afraid of? She says, what all men fear, that what they are will never be good enough. And to a degree, that's true, right? One of the biggest things that's never really talked about in the Black Panther mythos, whether in the main Marvel Universe line of comics or even in the Ultimate Universe, is T'Challa's fear of not being good enough, of living up to the legacy, because there's a huge dynasty that came before him. Now, this is a struggle that not a lot of people can relate to, and I would imagine that with people being unable to relate to a particular struggle, they're dismissive of that struggle. But it's very interesting when you look at T'Challa because it's the side of him that you never see. And so ultimately, even he kind of dismisses this. He refuses to give it any real meaning. And he says, I have to go speak to the Vodou Khan today. They have counsel for me. Now, the Vodou Khan are basically Wakanda's mystics, if we want to call it that, right? They're almost similar to like the oracles of ancient Sparta in the sense that maybe they have magical powers, maybe they don't, but they're a very intrinsic part of Wakanda's history. So if like T'Challa, for whatever reason, were to go in there and massacre them all, assuming that he actually could, the Wakandan people would turn against him, right? So of course he doesn't really do anything that extreme, even though it seems like he doesn't necessarily have a reason to. Instead, what happens when he sits down with the Vodou Khan is they say, like, we have had a vision, and this vision is about you, that a woman of light will come to you. She is around you now. Fates intertwined. Between you, there is a bond made during war, and she will give you an heir, the heir that Wakanda has awaited for generations. Now, for those of you guys who saw the first video, please don't post any spoiler comments. But one of the other things that happens is you realize T'Challa doesn't really set much store by the quote-unquote old ways, that he looks at the Vodou Khan and these mystics as just kind of nonsensical, right? Just people who were sitting up there in a cave somewhere, right? Throwing bones on a table and claiming to understand what it means with the stars, right? He just considers it to be nonsense. But outside the perimeter of Wakanda is the ongoing conflict between himself, or I guess the Wakandans, specifically the Dora Milaje, and the forces of Khonshu and Ra. And so ultimately Black Panther shows up on the field in this conflict. Now it's one of these things where he just lays waste to the forces of Khonshu and Ra pretty quickly, right? Because I mean, you know, it's a very capable vessel and it's just designed to show how powerful he is on the scene. But that's when you switch over to Khonshu and Ra, right? And what you find out is they are talking to a particular spy within Wakanda itself. We don't know who this person is. We don't know what role they play. In fact, we won't even find out over the course of this comic. I'm sure we'll find out by the time we get to the end of the second volume. But the fact is, right, that this person says, I have betrayed Wakanda as I betray them now. Did I not give entrance to your assassin? did I not place her next to Wakanda's king? And is the king not dead? Now that comes in response to Khonshu questioning the loyalties of this person, and even bringing in the idea of like, yes, you gave us the information we needed, but at what cost, right? And so the response of Khonshu and Ra here is, in the vacuum of the Maker, we have held this continent except for the sacred Wakanda. We have grown tired of their sovereignty. We need information, weaknesses, vulnerabilities in their armaments. We need to storm Wakanda itself and break T'Challa. So it's very much just kind of going after the king. Now again, the Maker, for those of you guys who aren't aware, click the playlist at the end of this video. I'll have my guy Alex basically put that playlist there. That will give you a link to everything going on in the Ultimate Universe, the arrival of the Maker, all the stuff that got changed. But basically, it's an evil version of Reed Richards that kind of altered the course of this Earth so that things played out differently than they were supposed to. But there's a kind of back and forth between this spy and Khonshu and Ra, where they just kind of say like, give us what we need. And where the spy says, look, understand, like I'm sending you information, but it's not because I work for you. It's not because I'm some agent operating on your behalf. It's simply because we have mutual interests. Should those interests change, you will never see or hear from me again, right? And so even Khonshu and Ra realize that, right? The question is asked like, do you trust this spy? And the response is no, but I trust they want Wakanda to fall. And so what you get here is this kind of question from T'Challa of who it is he can actually trust. He doesn't really know. And that's the danger of having a spy in your ranks like this. You don't know who you can trust and who you can't. You don't know if the person that you're talking to is shaking your hand with their right hand and looking to stab you with their left. You have no clue, right? And it just creates this incredible culture of distrust. But T'Challa, every bit as intelligent and capable as you would expect him to be, doesn't show his hand. And everybody at this kind of council chamber, the Dora Milaje, Shuri, Okoye, even a couple of people who are here as like personal spies, basically working for him, it's all of them discussing the idea of a spy being there working on behalf of Khonshu and Ra, but nobody's saying anything. The only thing they can really give, at least these spies, is they say, we cannot find Khonshu and Ra directly, but what we can do is find evidence of them being in a place. That we found evidence that shows that like someone is operating in this part of Africa and no one's supposed to be there. They say animal migration has changed here. The beasts are avoiding this place, and it seems to be nothing, yet it changes the natural world around it, and it has only done this for days. And so in turn, T'Challa goes and checks this place out by himself. The funny thing is like when he arrives there, he's immediately shot down. And what you get is just kind of like these agents of Khonshu and Ra that, try to kill him, destroy him, and that's essentially it. But he's rescued, basically with the arrival of Storm. Now, Storm is who we saw at the end of the first video. Not only Storm, Eric Kilmonger. And that's one of the cool things here is that these characters are not the same as they are in the main Marvel Universe. Storm and T'Challa have a very long history in the main Marvel Universe, albeit by way of retcons, but they met as children, they fell in love, but duty and responsibility separated the two. Eric Kilmonger, his story in the comics is really not that dissimilar from his story in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, barring the idea of him being a son of Wakanda. But the fact is that like with Storm here on the scene, she doesn't really know much about him, right? But you do have Eric Kilmonger meeting with T'Challa. And one of the things that happens is it kind of shows the differences between the two, where Kilmonger says like, there's no servants out here, King. Here, we must hunt our meals, right? You have to operate like one of us, and we take nothing for granted. And so there's a kind of discussion, right, between these two that goes back and forth. And basically, Eric Kilmonger reveals that he is a son of Wakanda, a prodigal son, as the Christians say. He says, but I have little interest in returning. And the question of T'Challa is, of course, why? And of course, Eric Kilmonger chimes in and says, I got tired of sleeping in paradise while people who looked like me suffered in the world beyond it. And I got tired of being told I should be proud to do so. Now, this is cool. And it's actually a really, really interesting thing because what it does is it borrows like the Michael B. Jordan depiction of Eric Kilmonger from the Marvel Cinematic Universe and kind of changes it up a little bit. But the idea of T'Challa is he says, the Black Panther protects the innocent. And that's when Kilmonger chimes in and says, so it is said, let's turn our minds from the innocent to the guilty. Tonight, Aurora and I want to show you what our enemies truly seek. And it is not Wakanda. So of course, they throw a bag over his head and then they take him out to a different location. And when he gets there, he's totally unfamiliar with like this giant temple that seemingly has like a panther head on it. Now, the fact that he doesn't know about this is particularly intriguing because what it shows is T'Challa does not really have the kind of worldly experience that you would expect in the Ultimate Universe as this character does in the main Marvel Universe. In the main Marvel Universe, there's nary an inch of Africa that T'Challa is not aware of, right? It's like one of the first things that they explored. Start there, work your way out, and then check out the rest of the world. So the fact that here he stumbles across this place shows that like he's lived a fairly sheltered life. He's intelligent, he's capable, but sheltered nonetheless. And he asks like, what is this place? And Kilmonger doesn't really give him a whole lot of information. He just says, follow me and I will show you what it is. And ultimately he tells him like, your armor is not going to do you any good, right? You don't need to wear that here. Not only that, the fact that his armor won't respond to his commands offers some kind of insight into what's happening in this place. And so when he gets rid of his armor, Eric Killmonger basically drops a stone down a hole, which is the signal to Storm that like, hey, myself and T'Challa are here, things are cool, let's go. And they just kind of travel down to the bottom of this pit. When they get there, what they end up finding is this gigantic sphere, seemingly of energy. But along the way, T'Challa's asking these questions, right? He was like, what is this place? What's going on here? And the only answer he really gets from Storm is the unknown. This place, the people who built it, it's a culture older than Wakanda. And where T'Challa considers this to be impossible, Storm's like, no, it is. This is an incredibly old place. And Killmonger says like, we're ahead of Khonshu and Ra. They do not know that this place exists, only the possibility of its power. And so when they arrive there, there's no real indication exactly of what this thing is. And even T'Challa himself doesn't fully understand it. What you end up doing though, before you find out, is you switch over to Shuri. And of course, what happens here with her character, she's just kind of in bed and somebody sweats on her, right? She immediately jumps up, realizing there's an assassin here. That person tries to kill her. And you get this kind of back and forth battle between the two. Okoye jumps in and you kind of have the two of them basically dealing with this assassin. And so ultimately Shuri just jumps out and goes after the assassin directly. Now, this is one of the things that I do love about Shuri's character. And I think it's one of the things that was lost in translation when it came to the MCU, likely because they fast-tracked it too much. But Shuri in Marvel Comics is every bit as capable as Black Panther is. Her level of intelligence is not on that level. The way that you saw Shuri depicted in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, that's T'Challa, right? That's Black Panther in Marvel Comics. He's one of the top 5 smartest men in the world. And I think he's in like the number 3 or the number 4 spot, but he's incredibly capable. But for everything else, conflict, battle strategy, all that kind of stuff, Shuri is just as capable. She's a little more headstrong and a little more reckless than T'Challa is, but she still is incredibly capable. But ultimately, she catches up to who this assassin is, right? This person that works directly for Khonshu and Ra. And this person just kind of casts a spell. And it basically just kind of distracts, Shuri just long enough for this person to be able to make a move on her. And they do momentarily get the upper hand. But what this person says is of particular interest. They say, you thought the gods would let this place reign. You think this is a kingdom. Wakanda is a scar. I was raised believing in all of your lies. Khonshu found me blind, and now I see. And so Shuri figures out pretty quickly, this girl's a Dora Milaje, or at least she was at one point in time. And so Shuri asks, like, why would you betray us? And this woman says, there is greater power in the upper and lower kingdoms than you fools know. You raise me to be a warrior. Ra and Khonshu will make me a god. And of course, that's when you basically have like T'Challa who comes out of nowhere and basically saves his sister's life. This girl is of course incapacitated and then seemingly just like self-destructs, right? Just like literally disintegrates. And that's essentially it. But there is a kind of back and forth, right? Of course, Shuri reveals this girl was Dora Milaje at one point in time, that she spoke of Khonshu, that they are in our ranks. But the reality is that T'Challa already knows all this stuff. And so what you do is you switch back over to Khonshu and Ra, where again, they have this conversation. Your Milaje failed. We wanted death, but fear will be enough. And where the statement of Khonshu is, you play with Wakanda, Ra, you underestimate them. The statement of Ra, hardly. Their king is dead. They fear us in their ranks. Their strength was their safety, Khonshu, and we have taken it from them. And the response of Khonshu, you underestimate T'Challa. And that's where Ra says, I estimate him accurately. And that's the whole point here, right? That's why playing shadow games and things like this for like a long-term strategy is not the best goal. But messing with the head of T'Challa, driving him to question the people in his ranks, that is what will really lead to their success. Because Ra says, He knows our names, not what we are. He knows we seek power, but he does not understand what that power is. And he still believes in his gods, his withering and impotent gods. When people turn to their kings and see fear, they will lose their will. When kings turn to their gods and see weakness, they lose everything. I have tired of playing with spies and assassins. Gather the willing, we will destroy Wakanda by the light of the moon. It's cool because again, by creating this circumstance where T'Challa questions everybody around him, suddenly the role of the king becomes very isolated, and you're one false step away from descending into paranoia and madness. When you get to a place as a king where even your inner party begins to question you, then that means that the people that you rule, your subjects, question you. They lose faith in you. But when he talks to Okoye, like, she gets pissed, right? I mean, she's an angry wife screaming at her husband, which is probably the one thing that all kings fear, right? But she's like, enough, no more secrets, no more hiding things. What's going on here? And he says, I will tell you everything that you need to know. But what you will do is you will come to me. You will meet me in this location. You will tell no one that you are going there. You will not tell my sister. You will not tell the Vodou Khan. You will tell the Dora Milaje, nothing. You are to come there silently and without anybody following you. When she gets there, you find that T'Challa has built a new inner circle for himself. Of course, Shuri is there, but you also have Kilmonger and you have Storm. And that's where the underestimation comes into play, because Ra and Khonshu are banking on boxing T'Challa into a corner where paranoia grips him and he loses the faith of everybody around him. The people are losing faith, and we'll see why that matters here in a minute, but he is still looking at everybody else. But they still don't fully grasp the nature of this power they're dealing with one exception. That what happens here is they use Vibranium that's charged by Storm and have it interact with this sphere. And what it does is it just leads to unchecked growth, seemingly a kind of mutation of sorts. And so that's when they say, like, that's really all we understand about this. But it's all we can understand, right? The material enhances life. You found it in a temple because that culture worshipped it. They worshipped it because to them, it had the power of God. And so T'Challa gives an instruction to everybody around there. Tell no one of this. Ra and Khonshu have been silent. Shuri, we need to find them. I need to see the Vodou Khan. And so what happens is that when T'Challa goes to visit them, they're not the spies that you think they are. And in fact, they reveal a lot more about their role in Wakanda than you would think. The first is that they're aware of this object. They don't necessarily know exactly what it is. And if they do, they're not spilling the beans. They simply just reveal that it's been around for quite some time. But more so than that, what he's told is you have the throne in an era of great change for Wakanda, for Africa, for the world. I will tell you what the Vodou Khan believes this thing to be. You can decide if I am being honest. And so what she says is 2 trails of fire came from the sky. They found Africa, each of them with great power, the power to change the direction of time. Their origins are unknown. Those who found them called them the tears of the gods. One of them, you know, that indestructible element, that which has aided Wakanda, what science has called Vibranium. The other, you do not. The other spreads life like a plague. Your science has no name for it. It has been blind to its existence. Everything in this universe has its opposite, T'Challa, light and dark, death and life. Did you believe Vibranium could not? And so that's where he asks, like, this material, that it's basically like Vibranium. And she says it is the opposite of Vibranium, but no less powerful. Vibranium makes our weapons, our shields, our machines. It is the god of material. Think of its opposite as the god of flesh. It can accelerate life. From it, whole kingdoms can be born. Now, here's the cool thing about this is because if you take a step back and you look at what she's talking about and you remove yourself from this idea of, well, obviously it's some kind of a magical artifact, right, that just mutates things or something like that, I would argue this thing manipulates time. I mean, she more or less said that, right? And if you look at stories like Thanos' Quest, where Thanos came across the gardener who was using the time stone to speed up the power of his garden, I would argue that's what this is. This is the time stone that arrived on Earth at some point in time. And that's what's interesting here, is because she says, I have seen you in solitude. I have seen what you find. You will try to master it with your reason and power, and it will laugh at you, and it will change you, and you will beg for its change, but not before you will scream. And that's what T'Challa says, I will not beg or scream. And so again, it's kind of this back and forth where it's like, what is this artifact? And that's where you pick up with really the goal of Ra and Khonshu here and what the greater picture is. Because what they do is they get a hold of a farmer from Wakanda, they twist his mind, they turn him into a servant, and then they send him forward to attack Shuri. But the whole attack is essentially a ruse, right? He's there to destroy her, and it's probably like a secondary thing, right? Kill her if you can, but your main objective is that orb of energy. And while he's not able to grab the entire thing, because Storm and all these guys arrive on the scene to basically, help defeat this guy, that ultimately he's able to grab a piece of it, and he whisks it back to Ra and Khonshu. What they do in turn is strategically the smartest possible thing they could have done. That in the outlying territories of not just Wakanda, but Africa itself, that what they do is they appear to small villages, small locations where people are suffering due to any number of things, malnutrition or something along those lines, sort of illnesses and whatnot, and they bring cures. They bring the ability to fix them, right? To make them better. And it works. And because they're able to do these things, right? Because they make these changes and then they say, he will wake and be without pain. Will all of you awaken? And when they ask what awaken is, that Khonshu just says, to the salvation that is to come. It paints him as a kind of god, right? And that's where you have this meeting with T'Challa, where it says, so Khonshu is convincing people he's a god. And he's told he's performing miracles, brother, and building an army of zealots to die for him. And that's where T'Challa, again, is told by Shuri, he's already got his own myths. They say he built a kingdom from the earth itself. Miracles, brother, that is why they follow him. He heals the sick. He changes the earth. And people want to believe in his power. Why? Because as we mentioned so many times on this channel, in times of desperation, people will believe what they want to believe. And these are desperate people out there. When a person suddenly shows up on the scene and saves your son from the brink of death and says, all you have to do is recognize me as your god and bend the knee, sure, why not? The king of Wakanda's nowhere to be seen. And that's exactly what T'Challa calls himself out on. He says, I will not wage war against the people of Africa, no matter who they follow, right? I will not attack them for following Khonshu. And Shuri asks, then what, T'Challa? We hope for peace until he has an army large enough to climb over our walls? And T'Challa says, perhaps the walls are the problem. In isolation, we have allowed this. We remain in Wakanda. He walks among those people outside of Wakanda. Why respect a king behind a wall when a god walks among you? And even Shuri says, like, you sound like Eric Kilmonger. The response of T'Challa, maybe he's not wrong, right? It's a really, really cool recognition here. You can see a lot of themes are being borrowed from Black Panther when it comes to this comic, right? Black Panther from the MCU. But it's cool because while Shuri expresses some concerns about, well, I don't necessarily know if I trust Storm and that kind of thing, the fact is, right, that at the end of the day, T'Challa is making his peace with the circumstance that they are in. So again, it's pretty awesome because following that, Khonshu and Ra basically send their forces in, right, to attack what's basically a mineral refinery out in West Africa. And when they do, these are all kind of zealots, right? People who are operating on behalf of Khonshu. Now, we don't know how many of these people have had their minds twisted and how many do it voluntarily, but the fact is, like, Black Panther shows up here on the scene and confronts these guys directly. And where he's kind of taunted a bit, right? Wakanda moves to protect corporations now. T'Challa says, Wakanda stops terrorists. And that's where Khonshu says, then Wakanda hides behind its walls and its traditions and lets invaders steal from all the space around it. And where Black Panther challenges this, right? He's like, so you're not just pretending to be a god, you're pretending to be an activist too. The response of Khonshu, I am doing what Wakanda should have done generations ago. And you should be wise to allow me to do it, Black Panther, because there's nothing you can do to stop me. This guy's turning the African people against Wakanda. And so ultimately you have T'Challa who attacks him, and that's when the two of them just kind of realize, okay, then we're gonna have a war. With that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. I told you, it's an amazing comic. Let me know what you think down in the comments section, and I will catch you all later. Peace.